300 million years ago, our planet looked completely different from today. Imagine a world where instead of familiar trees, there grew giant horsetails reaching the height of a 10-story building.
These were not just plants but real monsters, reaching up to 30 meters in height with hard bark resembling armor.
In the swamps, meter-long centipedes as long as a baseball bat with numerous legs slithered, leaving tracks on the wet ground, as if a tank had passed. These creatures hunted small creatures, diving into thick vegetation and hiding from predators.
The time was filled with exotic life forms, dinosaurs the size of a car roaming the forest, and amphibians the size of a crocodile sloshing through the swamp. But this is not the strangest thing. In the air there were insects with a wingspan of 75 centimeters, which is more than some modern birds. How is this possible? The reason is that the oxygen level in the atmosphere then was 35%, twice as much as today. This created ideal conditions for the growth of giant organisms, both plants and animals.
The global climate was constant and warm, without sharp temperature changes, and the humidity reached 90%. Now imagine this. In such an environment, even small lizards could grow to the size of modern dogs. How could such giants exist?
The secret lay in the ecosystem, where each element was interconnected. Microorganisms in the soil helped retain moisture, and the abundance of vegetation provided food not only for insects but also for larger creatures. And here comes the really crazy part. In conditions where plants could grow to such sizes, forests consisted of trees that probably served as homes for unknown to science creatures. At this time, the Earth underwent incredible transformations, preparing the ground for the appearance of dinosaurs. But how is all this connected to dinosaurs? The answer is shocking. All these giant plants and insects became the basis for the ecosystem in which later appeared predators and herbivores. Just imagine, in this world full of life, in the end, dinosaurs became the rulers of the planet. But the most incredible thing is that all these creatures that inhabited the Earth disappeared, leaving behind only traces in the form of fossils. What caused them to disappear? The answer lies in the changes in climate and the ecosystem that came in place of this epoch.
On Earth, there existed a tropical climate that could be called a paradise for plants and animals. Imagine an environment where temperatures ranged from 25 to 30 degrees Celsius and humidity reached 90%.
This meant that everywhere it was eternal summer and plants grew without any seasonal changes. The forests were dense and diverse, with trees reaching heights of 30 meters, their trunks covered in hard bark that protected them from adverse conditions.
Each tree looked like a 10-story building, creating an impressive green canopy over the heads of the inhabitants of that time. In such conditions, giant ferns and conifers thrived, some of which had wingspans comparable to modern cars.
But this was not the most strange. In these forests, centipedes flourished that could reach lengths of up to 1 meter. Their sizes were astonishing. Imagine a centipede crawling across the undergrowth, leaving behind large footprints. In this humid climate, there were also amphibians the size of modern crocodiles, which easily hunted small animals. Water filled the lowlands, creating vast swamps where life teemed.
But the most remarkable thing was that there was more oxygen than today, 35% compared to the current 21. This created ideal conditions for the growth of insects, which became true giants. Dragonflies with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters once soared over the swamps like tiny airplanes, and there were so many of them that sometimes you could see clouds of these insects. These conditions allowed creatures to dominate the ecosystem, and they did not know that everything would soon change. In such heat and water, unique species developed that would later be replaced by others. And what is even more shocking,
In this environment, there were not only plants and insects, but also the first ancestors of amphibians that had come onto land, preparing for the next evolutionary revolution. The level of oxygen in the atmosphere reached 35%, which was 15% higher than today's levels. What caused this? The entire reason lies in the vast amount of vegetation covering the Earth. Giant forests composed of tree ferns and conifers were essentially producing oxygen by absorbing carbon dioxide. These forests stretched for thousands of kilometers, creating an ecosystem where each tree could reach heights of up to 40 meters, and some species had trunks up to 2 meters in diameter. Imagine that there was twice as much oxygen as there is now. Breathing was like using an oxygen mask, and this allowed giant insects and reptiles to thrive.
for instance, dragonflies with a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters were not uncommon, allowing them to hunt other insects that could not survive in such an oxygen-rich environment. But that's not all. With the increase in oxygen, the sizes of animals also grew. Centipedes reached lengths of a baseball bat, and some amphibians resembled crocodiles. How was this possible?
The high concentration of oxygen significantly facilitated the growth and metabolism of these creatures, allowing them to reach incredible sizes. The strangest thing is that these conditions created an ideal environment for the appearance of the first reptiles, which later dominated the planet. The secret lies in the fact that such giants not only survived but also adapted to the new conditions, allowing them to become the main predators of their time. And here's where things get really crazy. With the changing climate and the decrease in the amount of oxygen, many of these species could not survive. Their sizes became burdensome, and they could not adapt to the new conditions.
Just imagine how our planet would look if the oxygen level had remained at such a level. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, because it was oxygen that served as a catalyst for the appearance of new forms of life, which began to fill the gaps left by the vanished giants. Each new species represented an evolutionary attempt to adapt to changing conditions. It's important to note that it was on this basis that the ecosystems we know today began to form. And what's even more shocking, changes in the level of oxygen occurred as a result of complex biochemical processes that remain a mystery to scientists.
Imagine forests where each tree reaches a height of 30 to 40 meters and has a trunk diameter of up to 2 meters. This is not just a fantasy but a reality when we talk about lepidodendrons, giant horsetails that dominated the ecosystems of the Carboniferous period. These plants did not only look like real monsters but also played a crucial role in shaping Earth's atmosphere. The most astonishing fact is that their hard bark could reach a thickness of up to 30 centimeters, allowing them to withstand strong winds and insect pests.
Lepidodendrons could live up to 1,000 years, during which they accumulated vast amounts of carbon, contributing to the formation of coal, which we use today. But how did they manage to survive in such conditions?
All thanks to their extensive root system, which could penetrate the soil to a depth of 5 meters, allowing them to obtain water even during dry periods. Now imagine these trees not only grew but also reproduced by spores the size of a tennis ball. These spores could travel great distances, facilitating the rapid spread of lepidodendrons across the planet.
But that's not the most peculiar thing. While we are used to seeing trees with leaves, lepidodendrons had a unique branching pattern that resembled a crown. Each shoot was covered with small scales that performed functions similar to leaves, enabling photosynthesis. The spores released by these plants had strong adhesive properties, allowing them to stick to surfaces and successfully germinate.
What is even more shocking, these giant plants were not the only inhabitants of their ecosystems. Among them lived ancient insects, the size of modern birds, which used lepidodendrons as shelter and food sources. Their wingspans sometimes exceeded 75 centimeters. Imagine the sight of giant trees surrounded by swarms of insects that could outshine even the largest modern animals. Lepidodendrons began to disappear around 300 million years ago, and the reason for this remains a mystery to scientists. Some believe that climate change has played a role, but no theory fully explains how such impressive plants could disappear against the backdrop of the thriving development of their ecosystems. Interestingly, these horsetails left behind not only coal deposits but also a whole range of fossilized remains that help us reconstruct the picture of life on the planet during that distant period. For example, in some places, entire forests preserved in their fossilized state can be seen in museums today. And what is even more intriguing,
In some regions, scientists have found evidence suggesting that lepidodendrons could form symbiotic relationships with fungi, allowing them to survive in conditions that seem impossible today.
the trunks of ancient plondendrons were true natural masterpieces, their surface covered in a characteristic texture resembling diamond-shaped scars formed by fallen leaves. These scars, in essence, were imprints of leaves that had fallen from the tree, leaving impressive patterns on the bark. One of the most fascinating features of these trunks was their ability to reach heights of up to 30 meters. Imagine them stretching towards the sky like colossal pillars. And what is truly astonishing, each trunk could have a diameter of up to 1 meter, making it almost as thick as a modern car. These plondendrons were not only enormous, but also had a hard bark that protected them from various climatic conditions that could threaten their existence. But that's not the most peculiar thing. Scientists suggest that the scars on the bark could serve a purpose beyond just protection. They likely played a role in the process of photosynthesis, allowing the tree to use sunlight more efficiently.
Research indicates that plondendrons could have complex mechanisms that regulated their water balance, which was crucial in conditions where humidity reached 90%. And what's even more shocking,
These trees could survive even when the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was twice as high as it is now. Yes, that's right. When plondendrons dominated, the oxygen content in the air was around 35%, allowing plants to grow to gigantic sizes. So what happened to these magnificent trees? They began to decline, but not due to climate change. Instead, competition with other plants that were better adapted to the new conditions became the main factor in their decline.
These giants left behind remarkable fossilized remains that we can see today. Each discovered specimen is like a window into the past, telling the story of how life on Earth once looked completely different.
And here's the most intriguing part. On some sites, remains of roots connected to fungi have been found, indicating that plundundrons could form symbiotic relationships with fungi, helping them survive in conditions that seem inhospitable. These connections could provide the trees with necessary nutrients, making them even more resilient. Have you ever wondered how these trees could reach such sizes? The secret, it seems, lay not only in their greatness but also in how they interacted with their surroundings. Giant calamites, like true titans of their time, could reach heights of 20 meters, and this was not a coincidence. Their growth resembled bamboo, which grows at an incredible speed, and this was due to the unique structure of their stems.
The stems of calamites were hollow, which not only lightened their weight but also allowed them to quickly gain height.
Imagine, in a humid tropical climate where annual rainfall could reach 30 meters, such plants could absorb enormous amounts of water through their extensive roots. In such conditions, they survived and thrived, creating dense forests where a variety of animals could live.
But that's not all. Unlike modern horsetails, which do not exceed 1 meter in height, calamites had tough bark and could form real trees, producing oxygen in quantities that were 3 times greater than modern levels.
These plants not only provided oxygen to the surrounding environment, but also created ideal conditions for the life of other organisms. What do you think would have happened if these giants suddenly disappeared? The answer to this question might surprise you, as the disappearance of calamites led to significant changes in the ecosystem. Remarkably, even after their extinction, their fossilized remains formed coal seams that we now use as fuel.
Incidentally, in some places, you can find such seams stretching for hundreds of kilometers and containing remnants of these giant plants that have been preserved for millions of years.
Their size and structure continue to amaze scientists who continue to study how they adapted to such conditions.
Did you know that some of these horsetails could reproduce with spores the size of a pea, which could travel long distances with the wind?
Imagine a forest where trees reached heights of up to 30 meters, their leaves the size of a dining table spread across the entire area. These were tree-like ferns called Ceronius, which dominated the plant world. Their root system was a complex network capable of supporting the giant trunks and providing them with nutrients. Did you know that some roots were up to 8 meters long, delving deep into the soil in search of moisture? These plants not only covered a vast area, but also created unique ecosystems where numerous insects and other creatures lived. And now, the most incredible part, their leaves, which could reach 3 meters in length, were not just enormous, but also had a unique structure that allowed them to collect water droplets, which then flowed to the roots. The Ceronius actively utilized all available resources. Imagine that one such plant could concentrate up to 20 liters of water during a single rain. But that's not all.
Ceronius had the ability to adapt to various conditions, allowing them to survive even in extreme heat. Some of their species could grow in the shade of larger trees, using them as support. It's fascinating that at certain points in their life cycle, they could produce spores the size of a pea, enabling them to spread over vast distances. Whenever the wind lifted these spores, they could travel several kilometers, finding new places to grow. How could they compete so successfully with other plants?
The secret lay in their ability to survive on poor soils where other species could not exist. Now imagine a world teeming with life and strength, where there were also giant amphibians the size of crocodiles hiding among the roots of the Ceronius. These giant ferns not only provided shelter for numerous animals, but also played a crucial role in producing oxygen, which was twice as much as today. This meant that the atmosphere was rich in life, and even insects could reach sizes that seem fantastical today. And what's even more astonishing, some of these ferns had thorns on their trunks that protected them from being eaten by herbivores. Chordates, the ancestors of modern conifers, dominated these unique ecosystems, forming vast forests that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Imagine trees up to 30 meters tall with hard needle-like leaves that could survive in conditions of high humidity and low light.
These plants did not just grow, they actively altered their surroundings. Their roots stabilized the soil, preventing erosion, and the resins they released created a protective environment where other organisms could thrive.
And the most remarkable thing, Chordates reproduced not by seeds, as many modern plants do, but by spores the size of a small pea. This allowed them to colonize new territories at an incredible speed. What does this mean? Forests composed of chordates created their own microclimate, where humidity could reach 90%. But that's not all. These forests were home to numerous unique creatures, such as giant insects and lizards that hunted them. For instance, some species of stick insects could reach sizes larger than a human hand. And now imagine that in these forests there were also strange creatures like amphibians the size of crocodiles, crawling through the undergrowth in search of food.
But that's not the end. Among the cordytes were special varieties that could grow up to 15 meters tall and had a bark structure resembling rough armor.
These trees formed dense canopies that blocked out sunlight, creating dark and mysterious understories. And what's even more astonishing? In some places, chordates formed vast forest masses that could cover areas the size of modern megacities.
For example, in some regions of Eastern Europe, remnants of forests covering more than 100,000 square kilometers have been found.
These masses were not just ecosystems, they were entire worlds teeming with life, interaction, and struggle for survival. But that's not all. Researchers have discovered fossils indicating that chordates could exist in symbiosis with many other species, creating complex and interdependent ecosystems. And the most incredible thing? These ancient forests formed the basis for the formation of coal deposits that are actively mined today. High oxygen content, reaching up to 35%, was a boon for the giant plants of the time. Their leaves and stems grew to 30 meters in height, resembling modern skyscrapers. Imagine forests where each tree was a powerful monster capable of absorbing vast amounts of carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen into the atmosphere, creating ideal conditions for its growth. What is truly remarkable is the absence of pests that allowed these plants to thrive without fear of being eaten. While today we face numerous beetles and caterpillars that damage agriculture, at that time only a few species could significantly harm such giant organisms. These plants had tough bark and thick stems, making them virtually invulnerable. And that's not all. Imagine how strong winds could tear leaves from trees the size of a bus, and those leaves falling to the ground turned into mulch, promoting the formation of humus. But how did these giants survive in competition with other plants? The secret lay in their ability to shade lower growing species, absorbing light and thus denying them a chance to survive. Amphibians the size of crocodiles plodded through the swamps, and among the tree giants, giant ferns unfurled their fronds, creating dense shade to create a unique ecosystem. It's amusing, but these conditions laid the foundation for the emergence of the first seed-bearing plants, which later dominated the planet. And the most shocking thing? These plants not only provided oxygen, but also served as a food source for the first herbivores, which began to develop, using powerful teeth to eat the tough leaves. As a result, the ecosystem reached an incredible diversity, where each new form of life found its place. But here's the question. How did all this change when the first predators appeared, capable of competing with herbivores?
Every morning in the marshy forest began with a thick fog that enveloped the trees like a soft blanket. Imagine a forest where each tree reached 30 meters in height, and their trunks were entwined with vines and moss.
These were not ordinary trees. Their roots delved into the bog, forming a complex network that held the soil in place. Here grew giant horsetail and entire groves of cycads that could reach heights of up to 15 meters. The air was so saturated with moisture that it seemed as if each breath caused you to sink into the humid mist.
But what was even stranger was that these forests did not have the familiar seasons. Temperature remained stable, fluctuating by only a few degrees.
And then things got really bizarre. In the dense thickets hid enormous insects, such as dragonflies with a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters. These giants hunted small vertebrates which were also not weak. Amphibians the size of crocodiles sloshed through the bogs, their rough skins covered in a thick layer of slime that protected them from predators. In such conditions, lizards that could reach a length of 1 meter circled in the air, their sharp teeth perfect for catching prey. But what was even more shocking? These forests were home to unique species, such as ancient reptiles that could confidently move both on land and in water. Imagine how life began in this world. Plants that could reproduce through spores the size of a tennis ball created such dense thickets that the sun barely pierced through the foliage. Trees with hard bark served as shelters for numerous creatures, and between them lay ponds filled with diverse aquatic organisms.
In such conditions, the ecosystem was a true arena for survival. Predators and herbivores fought for resources, and every moment could be the last for any of them. But wait, there's more. How could these giants survive in such conditions?
The secret lay in the incredibly high level of oxygen, which reached 35%, allowing many creatures to grow to sizes we can only dream of today. This oxygen-rich haven became a true home for the creation of life, where evolution took an unusual path. In this damp environment, every morning, every moment was full of surprises, and each new discovery could change our understanding of the past. Did you know what happens when dead vegetation is buried under layers of earth? Over millions of years under pressure and heat, vast deposits of coal are formed which we use today. These dead forests, such as giant horsetails and ferns, began their journey to coal when their remains accumulated at the bottom of swamps, creating thick layers of organic material. Imagine how each year in this tropical paradise seasons changed, bringing new plants that eventually died and settled at the bottom, forming peat layers up to several meters thick. But that's not the strangest part. In an anaerobic environment where there was no oxygen, the decomposition process slowed down, and plant remains were preserved in their original state. How did all this turn into coal? The secret lay in the prolonged effect of pressure, which could reach 100 atmospheres and temperature exceeding 100 degrees Celsius. Under such conditions, peat gradually turned into lignite, and then, with further heat and pressure, into coal. Moreover, this process could take from several million to tens of millions of years. And here's what's truly astonishing. The coal seams we find today can reach a thickness of up to 30 meters, making them real giants among useful minerals. And imagine this. Some of these deposits formed on the territory that is now part of Europe and North America, where once grew giant tropical forests. And here's where it gets really crazy. In just one area of Western Virginia, there are coal seams that are over 300 million years old. This means that every time we light a fire, we are essentially bringing back to life ancient forests that died millions of years ago. The coal we use holds the history of entire ecosystems. And now, imagine how many more secrets are hidden in the depths of our planet waiting to be discovered.
Coal formation is a remarkable process that begins with the death of plants that grew in vast forests. Imagine these forests teeming with giant ferns and conifers reaching heights of 30 meters. When the plants died, they settled at the bottom of bogs, where the lack of oxygen and high moisture prevented their decomposition. This process is called peat formation, and it is the first step in coal formation.
As new layers of vegetation accumulated on top of the old, they created pressure that compressed the peat into a state resembling coal. Isn't it fascinating? For coal to form, vegetation must go through several stages, including lignification, where the woody components become harder and more carbon-rich. This results in the formation of anthracite, which contains up to 98% carbon. Now imagine that these coal layers have been accumulating over millions of years, forming reserves that we use today.
Geologists assert that coal deposits formed as a result of complex interactions between plants, climate, and geological processes that altered the landscape of our planet.
Coals formed under conditions that are unlikely to repeat, as the atmosphere of that time contained 30% oxygen, fostering the growth of giant plants. And here's the most astonishing fact. This coal wealth gave its name to an entire geological period. So the term Carboniferous originates from this very process that we can still observe today in coal mines around the world. The coals we find today may be millions of years old and still hold secrets of ancient ecosystems. But did you know that coal is not the only product that formed under these conditions? There are many other fossil fuels that can tell their own stories. Giant dragonflies, the Meganeuridae, were true monsters of their time. The span of their wings reached 70 centimeters, which is more than most modern birds. Imagine them soaring over tropical swamps, their transparent wings shimmering in the sun, creating a breathtaking sight. These predators not only amazed with their size but also with their hunting methods. With razor-sharp mandibles, they could catch their prey in mid-air. Did you know that Meganeuridae could reach speeds of up to 25 kilometers per hour? This gives an idea of how they dominated their ecosystems. Their enormous size was a result of higher oxygen levels in the atmosphere, which could reach up to 35%, allowing insects to grow to such incredible proportions. How did they survive in such conditions? The secret lay in their physiology. The lungs of Meganeuridae were incredibly efficient, allowing them to obtain necessary oxygen even at low atmospheric concentrations. But that's not all. They had a unique eye structure consisting of more than 20,000 facets, enabling them to see in a spectrum range inaccessible to most modern insects. In their world there were no equals, and they stood at the top of the food chain, hunting smaller insects and even small amphibians. But what is even more astonishing, Meganeuridae could survive in their ecosystems due to complex reproductive processes. Females laid eggs directly on the water surface, and their offspring hatched in conditions without natural enemies. This allowed them to successfully compete with other predators. It's fascinating that these dragonflies could thrive in both fresh and salt water, making them adaptable to the most diverse habitats. And imagine this, it was their ability to adapt that could have contributed to their long existence.
But the most intriguing aspect, their extinction was linked to climate changes that occurred millions of years later, and some scientists suggest that they might have been the ancestors of modern dragonflies. What do you think?
On Earth there existed a giant millipede called Arthroptera, which could reach a length of up to 2.5 meters. Imagine that. This was the largest terrestrial arthropod in history, crawling through ancient forests where trees were as tall as 10-story buildings. How was this possible? The high level of oxygen, up to 35%, allowed these giants to breathe in a way that modern insects can only dream of. Arthroptera had a hard exoskeleton that protected it from predators and could move at great speed, hunting its prey. But wait, you won't believe what it looked like. Its body was covered in sharp spines that served as protection against attacks. The most unusual thing? These spines could reach a length of up to 5 centimeters. How did they survive among other ancient creatures? Their secret lay in their omnivorous nature, allowing them to feed on both plants and other animals. Arthroptera hunted in groups, making it easier to find food and protect themselves from predators. But that's not all. Their eyes consisted of numerous facets, giving them the ability to see in almost all directions. Now imagine that at the same time there were giant amphibians and reptiles the size of modern cars on the planet. In such conditions, Arthroptera became a true predator, dominating its ecosystem. How did everything change?
With the disappearance of forest and climate changes, these millipedes couldn't survive. But what's shocking is that some scientists believe their descendants could have evolved into the modern millipedes we see today.
Imagine if they had survived. How would we live with such neighbors? Arthroptera was not just a giant of its time, but also a crucial link in the chain of evolution.
This colossus left its mark on history, still fascinating researchers and enthusiasts of paleontology. Scientists have even found fossilized remains of Arthroptera, perfectly preserved, and their size is astonishing. Some specimens could reach a length of up to 2.5 meters. But do you know what's even more incredible? Their environment was so rich that there were more than 30 different insect species per square meter. While you might think that extraterrestrials are something out of science fiction, consider that in ancient times, Earth was home to creatures that looked like real monsters.
Imagine giant dragonflies with wingspans of 75 centimeters, larger than some modern birds. How is that even possible? The secret lies in the extremely high level of oxygen, which was 35% compared to today's 21%. Breathing in such conditions was like wearing an oxygen mask, allowing insects to grow to incredible sizes.
But that's not all. The oxygen also enabled their respiratory systems to function efficiently, providing enough oxygen for such massive organisms. For instance, some millipedes reached lengths comparable to a baseball bat.
How did they survive in such conditions? The answer lies in their anatomy. They had special tracheae that allowed oxygen to reach their cells directly, bypassing the blood.
Now imagine these giants not only surviving but also hunting their smaller kin. Giant amphibians the size of crocodiles crawled through the swamps, their skin covered in hard armor protecting them from predators. What's even more astonishing?
These conditions not only facilitated the growth of sizes but also increased their survival rates. Insects could reproduce faster and in larger numbers, resulting in more than 30 different species per square meter of forest. They formed complex ecosystems where each creature played its role in maintaining balance, and it seemed like the perfect habitat, but such changes in the atmosphere couldn't last forever.
Eventually the oxygen level began to drop, marking the beginning of the end for these giant creatures. But what's truly remarkable is that despite their disappearance, their descendants still inhabit Earth, albeit in smaller sizes.
And the craziest part? Some of them have retained their ancient features and you can still encounter them today. Giant cockroaches, Archimelacrist, the size of a rat, were true monsters of their time, and their sizes were simply astonishing. These insects could reach lengths of up to 30 centimeters, making them the largest representatives of their kind. Unlike modern cockroaches, which hide in cracks and avoid light, Archimelacrist did not fear open spaces, and its hard shell provided reliable protection from predators. But that's not the most surprising. Their enormous sizes were possible due to the high level of oxygen in the atmosphere, which was 35%. Imagine breathing in such a world where there was twice as much oxygen as today. This allowed not only cockroaches but also other insects to reach incredible sizes. What's even more shocking? These giants could crawl on the ground like modern lizards and even hunt small creatures using their sharp spines and powerful jaws. Their size, comparable to the length of a child's hand, allowed them to easily handle prey that was much smaller. And now imagine this. In conditions of high humidity and heat, Archimelacrist could reproduce so quickly that its population could rapidly increase, filling forest expanses. These cockroaches not only survived but also dominated their ecosystem, making them true rulers of their world. And here's where it gets really crazy. Archimelacrist did not have the usual wings like its modern relatives, which allowed it to remain invisible to predators that hunted smaller insects. Their ability to adapt in snake forests and marshes was truly unique. But what happened to these giants?
The answer is shocking. Their disappearance was linked to a sudden change in climate when the oxygen level began to decrease and the temperature became unstable, making their existence impossible.
But even after all this time, Archimelacrius left its mark on evolution, and its descendants still inhabit the planet, albeit in smaller sizes than their ancestors. The spores they used for reproduction were the size of a tennis ball and could spread over long distances, ensuring the survival of the species in new conditions. These facts highlight how diverse and amazing life on Earth was at that time. Pulmonoscorpii, scorpions that inhabited the planet, could reach lengths of up to 70 centimeters, making them true giants of their time. These creatures, with their hard exoskeletons and long tails, could easily crawl on land, using their powerful pincers to capture prey. Imagine, in dense forests where each tree seemed like a 10-story building, such predators hunted invertebrates and small vertebrates, dominating other creatures. It's fascinating that their bodies were covered in chitinous plates that protected them from predators and harsh environmental conditions. But the most astonishing fact is that these scorpions had lungs, allowing them to breathe air, which made them unique among their ancestors who relied on water for respiration. This meant they could migrate over long distances in search of food and new habitats, venturing onto land where other marine creatures could not survive. Isn't it strange that some scientists suggest they might have hunted at night, relying on their sensitive antennae to detect movements in the dark? While their contemporaries were mere small creatures, Pulmonoscorpii thrived in conditions where the oxygen level in the atmosphere was 35%, almost twice that of today. This created ideal conditions for their growth and reproduction. These predators did not just survive, they flourished, and their populations could reach astonishing numbers.
For comparison, modern scorpions rarely exceed 10 centimeters in length, but during the time of the Pulmonoscorpii, such sizes were the norm. How did they adapt to such conditions?
The answer lies in their ability to survive in the most diverse ecosystems where other inhabitants could not. Their hard exoskeletons and powerful pincers allowed them to be not only predators but also defenders of their territories, covering entire areas of forests and marshes. But how did they cope with competition? The secret was in their extraordinary ability to survive and adapt to changing conditions, making them one of the most fascinating creatures of the Carboniferous world. And now, imagine that they left behind numerous fossilized traces, which paleontologists continue to study, trying to unravel the mysteries of their lives and evolution. These studies show that some of them developed various hunting and defensive strategies, adding even more intrigue to their way of life. It's interesting that these scorpions became the ancestors of modern spiders and scorpions that inhabit Earth today. What were their secrets of success? At that time, the planet was inhabited by giant insects and arthropods, but large vertebrate predators capable of controlling their sizes were absent. Do you know why? The ecosystem was organized differently. At the top of the food chain, amphibians the size of small crocodiles dominated, but they were not true predators. Imagine this: 30-centimeter-long predatory fish swam in the water bodies, but their sizes did not shock as much as the millipedes that crawled through the wet forest soils, reaching the length of a baseball bat. These giant creatures could survive due to an incredible level of oxygen in the atmosphere, which exceeded 25%. This provided their respiratory systems with enough oxygen for them to grow to colossal sizes. And now, the most astonishing part, these millipedes and dragonflies with a wingspan of 75 centimeters could hunt small vertebrates and other insects, but they had no competitors among large predators.
Do you know what is even more shocking? The fact that their ancestors, the first terrestrial vertebrates, were just beginning to emerge from the water, and their sizes were insignificant compared to the lizards that later dominated the ecosystems.
While in other parts of the world, larger predators like dinosaurs were evolving, on this planet there were no conditions for their existence. Trees grew up to 30 meters in height, creating dense forests where light barely reached the ground. This created an ideal environment for the growth of giant insects, but it did not allow vertebrates to become competitive. The humidity was 90%, and the animals living in these conditions could not evolve into large predators. What do you think would have happened if real predators had appeared? They could have drastically changed the balance of the ecosystem and possibly stopped the development of such giants as dragonflies the size of a sparrow or millipedes that could reach the size of a baseball bat. In the end, this unique balance of nature remained in force until global changes occurred, leading to the extinction of many species and opening the way for new forms of life.
It is interesting that these changes became the basis for the appearance of the first dinosaurs and mammals, which later occupied their niche in the food chain.
Imagine a world where amphibians were true giants. Aeroptions could reach 4 meters in length and weigh over 100 kilograms. These creatures did not just crawl on land, they dominated in water bodies, hunting fish and other small animals. They had a powerful jaw and sharp teeth, allowing them to easily capture their prey. And now, the most peculiar thing. Aeroptions had long, thin limbs that enabled them to move quickly on land and swim in water. Do you know what is even more astonishing? Their ancestors were small creatures, but evolution led to the creation of such giants capable of surviving in harsh conditions.
Diplodocus, their closest relatives, were no less impressive. Their bodies could reach 3 meters in length. They had wide, flat heads and powerful jaws, perfectly adapted for catching fish.
This species could both swim and move on land, making them versatile hunters. And here comes the truly bizarre. Diplodocus had a unique respiratory system, allowing them to stay underwater for several hours. How did they do it? The answer lies in their anatomy. Their lungs were adapted for efficient oxygen absorption, giving them an advantage in the struggle for survival. Now imagine that amphibians did not just exist in isolation, they formed complex ecosystems where they interacted with other species, including large insects and primitive reptiles. These ecosystems were real arenas for resource competition.
Remarkably, in their habitat one could encounter not only amphibians but also the first ancestors of lizards, which began to develop in parallel. And do you know what is the most mind-boggling?
These creatures could talk to each other using sounds similar to croaking, allowing them to communicate and coordinate their actions. Thus, the world of the first amphibians was not just an empty space but a real arena of life, full of interactions and discoveries. It is interesting that these amphibians became the ancestors of modern amphibians, and their legacy is still felt in our water bodies.
Aegirus, a marvel of nature, could reach up to 4.5 meters in length, making it a true giant among amphibians of its time.
Imagine a creature slithering through marshes, its scaly skin covered in a hard shell that protected it from predators. These amphibians not only survived in conditions where the air was 35% oxygen, allowing them to grow to incredible sizes and strength, but Aegirus possessed powerful legs that enabled it to move both on land and actively hunt its prey in water. Its jaws, filled with sharp teeth, could capture even large invertebrates like crustaceans, which were its primary food source. But what's even stranger, Aegirus could hunt its own kind, using its speed and agility to gain the upper hand in the struggle for survival. What's most astonishing?
It could live both in fresh water and on land, making it a versatile predator of its time. Its habitat was filled with giant plants reaching heights of 30 meters, creating a unique ecosystem reminiscent of a tropical forest.
These forests were filled with sounds created not only by Aegirus but also by other primitive creatures, such as ancient insects with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters. It's fascinating that Aegirus was also an ancestor of modern amphibians, and its adaptation to various environments allowed it to become one of the most successful predators of its time. Some researchers suggest that such giants laid the foundation for the evolution of more complex ecosystems. But what's truly astonishing, Aegirus had the ability to actively reproduce in water, allowing it to rapidly increase its population. Although its descendants, frogs and salamanders, no longer reach such sizes, their genetic legacy lives on in every puddle and marsh on our planet. Additionally, its remains, found in various parts of the world, provide scientists with a wealth of information about how life on Earth evolved. Aegirus remains have been discovered in places like the United States and Europe, indicating its widespread distribution. Indeed, this giant left a mark on history that continues to inspire and interest scientists studying its unique features. It's interesting to note that some findings suggest Aegirus could reach sizes comparable to modern crocodiles, challenging our understanding of amphibian sizes in general.
Amphibians of this time were not just inhabitants of the land. Their lives were inextricably linked to bodies of water, and the reason lies in their reproduction.
These creatures laid eggs in water, and each egg, encased in a jelly-like shell, was the size of a mandarin orange. This shell protected the embryos, allowing them to develop in a safe environment where oxygen and humidity levels were sufficient for growth. But what is truly remarkable is that in some cases, the size of the clutch could reach up to 100 eggs at a time, creating massive carp-like spawning events. However, to survive, amphibians had to find places with ideal conditions, which limited their spread. The danger to the eggs came not only from predators but also from changes in water temperature. The temperature had to remain within 25 to 30 degrees Celsius for the embryos to develop normally. As the temperature increased or the water level decreased, the chances of the eggs surviving dropped sharply. Now imagine these amphibians, capable of moving on land, still being tied to bodies of water, as if their lives depended on them. Their tails and limbs, evolved under the influence of the environment, were perfectly adapted for quick movement in both water and on land, but reproduction always brought them back to the water. It is interesting to note that some species had the ability to undergo metamorphosis, transforming from aquatic larvae into terrestrial adults, adding even more complexity to their life cycle. And by the way, did you know that one such larva could grow up to 30 centimeters in length? This created a real food chain in the ecosystems where they lived. But that's not all. These amphibians not only adapted to life in water, but also became an important part of the ecosystem, regulating populations of insects and small invertebrates. All this formed a unique ecosystem where each link was important, and any change in the habitat could lead to catastrophic consequences.
For example, if the water level dropped, it could cause mass die-offs of eggs, which in turn would affect the population of predators that depended on these amphibians as a food source.
It is no wonder that such connections were critically important for maintaining balance. Interestingly, even the smallest changes in the ecosystem could trigger a chain reaction, leading to the extinction of species that were part of this complex process. First reptiles began to appear on the stage of evolution and became true innovators of their time.
These creatures, such as Halurasavers, represented something entirely new. Their skin was covered with hard scales, allowing them to retain moisture in conditions where their predecessors, amphibians, were dependent on water.
Imagine them strolling through warm, humid swamps without fear of drying out, unlike their ancient relatives who needed constant moisture. This gave reptiles a significant advantage in diverse ecosystems where conditions changed. They could hunt and reproduce on land, opening new horizons for the colonization of new territories. And here's where it gets really interesting. Reptiles had a unique ability to regulate their temperature, allowing them to actively hunt even on hot days when amphibians remained in the shade.
In fact, the body temperature of the first reptiles could reach 30 degrees Celsius, while their predecessors often depended on external heat sources.
This allowed reptiles to occupy various niches, from small predators to giant herbivores reaching lengths of 10 meters. But wait, that's not all. Their eggs were covered with a hard shell, allowing them to lay their offspring on land, not in water like amphibians. This provided protection from predators and adverse conditions, opening the door to large populations. And what's even more astonishing, their development led to the emergence of numerous species that later dominated the planet, including the ancestors of modern dinosaurs. These innovators in the history of life on Earth became increasingly diverse and adapted, and reptiles soon began to fill all available niches, from small forest predators to massive herbivores, leaving amphibians in the shade. Their success can be explained by their ability to more efficiently absorb oxygen through their lungs, allowing them to develop in conditions where oxygen levels were increasing.
In conditions where oxygen levels reached 35%, they could develop to unimaginable sizes, such as Stegosaurus reaching 15 meters in length.
This period became a true arena for reptiles, and they were not about to stop at what they had achieved. Geilonomus, the size of a lizard, was a true marvel of its time. Its length was only 30 centimeters, yet it was one of the earliest ancestors of modern reptiles. Imagine this tiny predator with sharp teeth and agile legs, hunting insects and small vertebrates that filled the tropical forests of the time. What makes Geilonomus truly unique, however, is its ability to adapt to various living conditions. It could climb trees using its sharp claws or hide in leaves from larger predators. Its body had tough skin that helped protect it from predators and harsh climatic conditions. Did you know that Geilonomus was one of the first members of a group that would later form the basis for animals like lizards and snakes?
This fact is astonishing. Geilonomus served as a prototype for an entire class of reptiles that would later dominate the planet. But that's not all. Its remains have been found in various parts of the world, including modern-day China and the Netherlands, indicating its wide distribution.
And what's even more shocking, some scientists believe that Geilonomus could even reach speeds of up to 10 kilometers per hour, which is quite an achievement for such a small reptile. If you think that's all, wait until you hear this. Some researchers claim that its behavior might have resembled that of modern lizards. They could bask in the sun on rocks to regulate their temperature. But here's what's truly amazing. In some of the findings, scientists discovered traces that suggest Geilonomus used not only its sharp teeth, but also cunning tactics to catch its prey. Perhaps it even lay in wait for its victim, like modern lizards do. The appearance of the amniotic egg was a true breakthrough for reptiles, allowing them to conquer land and occupy new ecological niches. Imagine that inside this egg was a miniature ecosystem protecting the embryo from the external environment. The egg's shell protected it from drying out, and the reserves of nutrients provided everything needed for development. These eggs were so sturdy that they could be laid in the most varied conditions, from hot deserts to humid forests. Now reptiles could reproduce far from water, opening the door for their colonization of new territories. But that's not all.
Amniotic eggs had a special shell that allowed the embryos to breathe, obtaining the oxygen necessary for growth and development. This was a completely new step, enabling reptiles to survive in conditions where other species might perish.
What's most amazing, these eggs were not just a means of reproduction, but also genuine incubators that helped in the development of the most adapted and resilient individuals.
For instance, some species could lay up to 100 eggs at a time, ensuring a high survival rate for the offspring. Now imagine that with such a large number of offspring, they could vary in size and shape, adapting to different living conditions.
These changes laid the foundation for further evolution, as reptiles began to dominate new levels on land. And that's not all. Amniotic eggs contributed to the formation of new groups such as dinosaurs, which then became the true rulers of the planet. But what's truly astonishing? Some of these eggs were as large as a football, allowing them not only to survive but also to thrive in the most varied conditions.
Pelycosaurs, known for their distinctive sails on their backs, were not just extraordinary creatures but genuine ancestors of mammals that inhabited warm and humid forests.
Imagine this. A pelycosaur could reach a length of 6 meters, resembling something between a lizard and a modern mammal. But what were those sails? They were elongated processes on the spinal vertebrae and could reach a height of up to 1 meter.
Some scientists suggest that these sails were used for thermoregulation, allowing pelycosaurs to cool down in hot climates, while others believe they served to attract mates. What's even more astonishing?
These ancient reptiles had teeth resembling needles, perfectly suited for catching fish and other small creatures. They hunted in water bodies, and their powerful jaws could open with a force equivalent to 30 kilograms.
Larger individuals, weighing up to 300 kilograms, roamed the bogs. Interestingly, pelycosaurs had light and agile limbs, allowing them to move quickly on land, and their strong paws helped them navigate through muddy terrain.
But that's not the most peculiar thing. Some pelycosaurs had not only sails but also spines on their backs, which could serve as protection against predators.
These predators were indeed formidable. Their teeth could be up to 5 centimeters long, allowing them to pierce the tough skin of pelycosaurs. Now imagine them hunting in dense tropical forests where every sound could signal danger.
And the most incredible thing? Some pelycosaurs were omnivorous, enabling them to adapt to various conditions and find food in the most unexpected places. This was a time when the planet was teeming with diverse life forms, and pelycosaurs were an integral part of this ecosystem. But what was their secret to survival? Some hypotheses suggest that their ability to reproduce quickly and adapt to changes in their environment played a crucial role in their success. This makes them one of the most intriguing creatures of their time. Dimethrodon, this extraordinary predator, was not just one of the first large land-dwelling creatures, but a true monster of its time.
It could reach lengths of up to 4.5 meters, making it a formidable opponent even for many modern predators.
Imagine this. On its back there was a massive crest up to 70 centimeters high, which served not only for thermoregulation, but also for displaying strength. This crest acted like a radiator, allowing Dimethrodon to quickly heat up in the sun, which was crucial for its metabolism, as it was an ectothermic creature. But how did it manage to survive in a world filled with threats?
Its teeth, sharp as razors, were perfect for tearing through the tough skin of other animals, giving it an edge over competitors. But wait, there's more.
Dimethrodon not only hunted but also used its strength to defend its territory from other predators. Its powerful paws and strong jaws allowed it to handle prey that could weigh more than itself with ease. This made it the dominant predator in an ecosystem where resource competition was fierce. Did you know that Dimethrodon was an ancestor of modern mammals? This discovery changed our understanding of its role in evolution.
Its descendants, with characteristics like warm-bloodedness and complex dental structures, became the foundation for future mammals. It's important to note that Dimethrodon was not a dinosaur. It lived before they appeared.
This places it in a unique position in Earth's history, but what's truly astonishing is that it could reach speeds of up to 20 kilometers per hour, which was incredible for its size. How did it manage this? The answer lies in its structure. A lightweight skeleton and powerful muscles allowed it to be fast and agile. And if you think that's all, consider this. Some scientists suggest that its behavior might have been similar to modern jaguars, which hunt alone using a stealth strategy. What else might this mysterious predator hide? It turns out that its fossilized remains have been found on all continents, indicating that Dimethrodon was a true master of adaptation in various conditions. The question is, how did it survive and dominate in such diverse climates? These facts only fuel our interest in studying it further. The climate at the end of the Carboniferous period underwent significant changes, leading to a true revolution in ecosystems. The temperature on the planet began to decrease, and the level of carbon dioxide fell to the levels we observe today. This meant that the vast wet tropical forests that once covered large areas began to disappear, giving way to more diverse ecosystems. For instance, the area of swamps where giant amphibians and ancient reptiles lived decreased, and the land became more open and sunny. Now imagine this. In place of the swamps came meadows and steppes, creating ideal conditions for the emergence of new flora and fauna.
But this is not the most astonishing thing. On the planet, seed-bearing plants began to dominate, which were able to adapt to the new conditions, and they became the basis for future forests. Do you know what is even more shocking?
The appearance of the first true reptiles which did not depend on water for reproduction became possible due to the change in climate. These creatures, like the ancestors of modern lizards, were able to conquer dry lands and began to actively spread.
Moreover, the disappearance of coal forests led to a significant decrease in oxygen in the atmosphere, which in turn allowed smaller organisms to occupy the niches that were previously occupied by giant insects.
At this time, for example, simple organisms began to evolve into more complex forms of life, and new predators emerged on the surface. Imagine how creatures that hunted on the land, and whose sizes exceeded even the largest dinosaurs that would appear later, began to roam. These changes in climate and ecosystems became a real catalyst for the evolution and diversification of living beings. And here begins the truly bizarre. Around 30% of the oxygen in the atmosphere decreased, affecting all, including insects. This led to the fact that some of them began to die out, while others, on the contrary, adapted to survive in the new conditions.
Thus, by the beginning of the Permian period, vast deserts formed on Earth, where creatures lived, about whom we know only from fossil fragments. And do you know what is the most bizarre?
At this time on Earth, there already existed the ancestors of mammals, which in the future would become the dominant class of animals.
The cooling of the planet became noticeable when the average temperature dropped to 30 degrees Celsius, and it was not just a minor change. Trees that once grew in warm and humid tropics began to lose their leaves, turning green forests into dry wastelands reminiscent of deserts. This marked the beginning of the end for many species that couldn't adapt to the new conditions.
Imagine, at this time the air no longer contained the 35% of oxygen to which creatures were accustomed, as forests began to shrink and oxygen became scarce. And the most shocking thing,
Many plant species that thrived in conditions of high humidity and warmth simply couldn't survive, and their place was taken by hard and thorny plants that could exist in conditions of water scarcity.
at this time giant reptiles began to appear on Earth, hunting those who survived in these new harsh conditions. Some of them reached lengths of up to 20 meters, making them dominant predators on land. Long and dry seasons, combined with sharp temperature fluctuations, led to the collapse of many ecosystems. Soils were no longer fertile, and rainfall became less frequent. Levels dropped to 25 centimeters per year in some regions. This meant that water sources became rare, and species dependent on them were on the verge of extinction. But that's not all.
Oceans also began to change, water temperature rose, and marine life that once flourished began to suffer from oxygen deprivation. For example, oxygen levels in oceans dropped to critical levels, leading to massive die-offs of marine organisms.
And here's where things get really crazy. Some fish species evolved to survive in low oxygen conditions, and their genes changed so that they could breathe air. This was a true miracle of nature. At the same time, massive forest fires broke out on land, and the ash from burned trees rose into the atmosphere, exacerbating climate conditions. And what's even more shocking, these changes laid the groundwork for the emergence of a new class of animals that, in the end, would lead to the dominance of mammals on the planet.
With each decade, the climate became harsher and harsher, and this was just the beginning of a long process that would continue for millions of years.
Climatic changes at the end of the Permian period were a catastrophe for the vegetation that had dominated the world during the Carboniferous period. Forests, where lush trees like megasporangiophytes reached heights of 30 meters and more, began to slowly disappear. Imagine forests where plants were as large as a 10-story building, and their leaves could shade an entire stadium.
But then the climate began to change. Temperatures rose sharply, and the level of carbon dioxide increased to 5,000 parts per million, which is twice as much as today. How could this have happened?
Volcanic activity, which was raging on the planet, released enormous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, creating a greenhouse effect and leading to abnormal conditions. Forests, which were once home to dragonflies with wingspans of 75 centimeters, began to suffer from a lack of moisture. And that's not all. Many plant species that had survived in conditions of high humidity were not prepared for such abrupt changes. As a result, forests thinned out, and more drought-resistant species began to appear. What's even more shocking? These changes led to a mass extinction that affected not only flora but also fauna. Up to 90% of all species on Earth disappeared. This meant that the very same trees that once stretched towards the sky were now gone, leaving only rare remnants as fossils. In their place, new ecosystems emerged where smaller, more adapted organisms dominated. At this time, the first simple flowering plants began to appear on the planet, which, as it turned out, were the harbingers of a new era. And here's where it gets really interesting. These very plants became the basis for the emergence of new forests that would later transform the entire planet. But this is just the beginning of the story about how the balance of life on Earth changed.
Pay attention. At this time, some amphibian species that survived could reach lengths of 2 meters. Their sizes are astonishing.
Giant horsetails and ferns, once dominant in Earth's ecosystems, began to rapidly disappear due to global climate changes that had a devastating impact on their habitats. Imagine this. The planet's temperature rose by several degrees and the level of carbon dioxide reached 600 parts per million. For these plants, this was a real trial. Climate change led to the drying out of wet tropical forests where horsetails could grow to the size of modern trees, turning these once lush forests into drier, less hospitable zones where the giants could no longer survive.
But that's not all. During this time, massive volcanic eruptions were occurring on Earth, releasing enormous amounts of sulfur and dust into the atmosphere. This caused acid rain, which destroyed plant roots and made the soil inhospitable.
What's even more shocking is that in some places, the rate of species extinction reached 30% over just 1 million years.
In conditions where horsetails and ferns couldn't adapt to the new conditions, their place was taken by more drought and temperature change resistant plants, such as flowering plants.
These new competitors not only survived but also began to dominate the changed ecosystem, displacing the giants that once ruled the forests. Thus, many species that had existed for millions of years simply couldn't cope with the sudden changes. And the most incredible thing? Some of these plants, like horsetails, had survived millions of years of evolution, but even they couldn't adapt to the new conditions. As a result, by the end of this period, only small remnants of them remained on Earth, but they couldn't compare to the giants that once dominated the planet. First true coniferous trees began to populate the Earth, marking a true revolution in the world of vegetation. Imagine forests where trees reach heights of up to 30 meters, with hard bark protecting them from the elements. These coniferous trees, such as Archaeopteris and related species, became dominant in ecosystems due to their ability to survive in conditions where other plants could not. While previous floriforms were losing their foothold, coniferous trees possessed a unique ability to photosynthesize even in low light conditions, allowing them to thrive in dense forests. But that's not the most astonishing part. Their seeds were protected by hard cones, making them less vulnerable to animal predation.
Moreover, coniferous trees could reproduce over large areas, spreading their seeds over distances of several kilometers.
And here's where it gets truly remarkable. Their wood became the ideal material for construction, leading to the establishment of the first rural settlements that used coniferous forests as a resource.
These trees not only shaped the landscape but also the life on Earth, as their wood facilitated the development of new technologies and construction methods. But what's even more astonishing?
They could adapt to various climatic conditions and survive in the harshest places, such as northern regions with low temperatures, where other plants simply could not survive. For instance, some coniferous tree species like pine can grow in extreme cold and even in poor soils. In this context, coniferous trees provided oxygen to entire ecosystems, releasing up to 30% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. But what's even more extraordinary is that their root systems could reach depths of up to 3 meters, allowing them to extract water and nutrients from deep within the earth, where other plants could not reach. Coniferous trees not only formed ecosystems, but also created habitats for numerous animals, such as lizards and mammals, which found shelter and food in their canopies. And even after millions of years, these trees continue to be an important part of our planet, preserving their appearance and adapting to new conditions. One of the most remarkable facts is that some coniferous trees can live up to 3,000 years, becoming living witnesses to historical events. Seed-bearing plants began to thrive in conditions that were vastly different from the moist forests of previous epochs. During this time, the climate became increasingly arid, and plants had to adapt to these new challenges. One of the key advantages of seed-bearing plants was the presence of seeds, which provided protection and nourishment for emerging plants, allowing them to survive in harsh conditions. For instance, seeds of conifers like Araucarias could remain viable for extended periods, awaiting suitable conditions for germination. These seeds had thick shells that protected them from desiccation and mechanical damage, giving them a significant advantage in dry climates. Notably, unlike spores, seeds ensured more reliable and efficient reproduction, which facilitated the spread of seed-bearing plants across vast territories. These plants began to dominate ecosystems, forming dense forests that could withstand changing climatic conditions. Around this time, the first flowering plants also appeared, adding even more diversity to the plant world. Their vibrant flowers attracted pollinating insects, enhancing reproduction and dispersal. For example, some species like magnolias could grow up to 25 meters tall and thrive in various conditions, from moist valleys to dry slopes. But that's not the most astonishing part. Some seed-bearing plants developed deep root systems that enabled them to extract water from deeper soil layers. Imagine this. These roots could reach lengths of up to 10 meters, allowing them to survive even the driest periods. And now, consider how plants like ginkgo could maintain their viability over millions of years, enduring climate changes that wiped out many other species.
In this context, unique adaptations emerged. Some seed-bearing plants evolved a waxy surface on their leaves to reduce water loss, while others learned to shed leaves during dry seasons to conserve moisture.
These strategies allowed seed-bearing plants to become not only resilient but also dominant in ecosystems where previously only spore-bearing forms of life reigned. Their success was so evident that they began shaping landscapes that would form the basis for future ecosystems. And here's the most extraordinary part. Some of these plants, like sequoias, could reach heights of up to 150 meters, creating entire forests where the air was rich in oxygen and unique animal species thrived under their canopies.
The decrease in oxygen levels in the atmosphere posed a real challenge for insects that had previously reached enormous sizes.
Imagine this. During that time, oxygen content dropped to 21%, significantly impacting the respiratory systems of these creatures, which were adapted to a more oxygen-rich environment where levels reached 35%. This meant that giants like dragonflies with a wingspan of 75 centimeters began to experience difficulties with breathing. How did they survive in these conditions? The secret lay in the fact that some species began to evolve, adapting to the new conditions by reducing their sizes to improve the efficiency of their respiratory systems. But this was not the most astonishing part.
Many of these small insects to adapt developed more complex tracheal structures that allowed them to use the available oxygen more effectively. What is even more shocking?
Some species, such as ancient flies, became smaller but retained many characteristics of their ancestors. And here is where it gets really strange. While some species were decreasing in size, others found ways to survive by using their migration abilities to travel long distances in search of more oxygen-rich zones. This created dynamic ecosystems where some species dominated while others became extinct. The decrease in oxygen not only affected sizes but also the diversity of insects. Ecosystems began to change, creating new ecological niches.
For example, the appearance of new predators and competitors led to a struggle for survival, shaping the distinctive features of various groups. And the most amazing thing?
As a result of these changes, some insects adapted so well that their descendants still exist today, serving as living witnesses to those distant times when oxygen levels were twice as high. Simple changes in the atmosphere led to a true revolution in the world of insects, and these changes continue to influence modern ecosystems, leaving us with the question of what else might happen in the future. Therapsids, remarkable creatures of the Permian period, were the ancestors of modern mammals and changed the course of evolution. These animals, which lived on Earth around 250 million years ago, possessed extraordinary features that allowed them to dominate the ecosystems of their time. For instance, some therapsids could reach lengths of up to 3 meters, making them quite imposing for their competitors. But that's not the most peculiar thing. They had rough skin that could be covered with hard spines, protecting them from predators. What's even more astonishing, these creatures developed unique thermoregulation mechanisms, enabling them to survive in variable climates. Scientists have found that some therapsids had more complex tooth structures than their ancestors, indicating a transition to a more diverse diet. Complex dental rows consisting of incisors, canines, and molars suggest that they began hunting larger and faster prey. But wait, there's more. Therapsids also displayed signs of social behavior, challenging their traditional image as solitary animals. Discoveries such as traces of communal nesting and hunting indicate that they could form groups to more efficiently obtain food. This discovery suggests that they were beginning to develop elements of complex social behavior. Interestingly, some therapsids had lungs that functioned more efficiently due to higher oxygen levels in the atmosphere, allowing them to be more active. And now, the most extraordinary thing, some species, like dichrodons, could reach the size of a modern rhinoceros, making them true giants of their time. Fossil finds show that their skulls had complex structures that allowed them to sense their environment at a level inaccessible to most modern animals. And the most amazing thing?
These creatures laid the foundation for the evolution of mammals, which ultimately occupied the top of the food chain. Thus therapsids not only survived in the face of tough competition, but also paved the way for future generations.
Gorgonopsids were not just ancient predators but true stars of the Permian period, earning their reputation with their terrifying saber-toothed fangs, which could reach up to 20 centimeters in length.
These creatures weighed up to 100 kilograms and were the size of a small bear, making them formidable predators of their time. But what is truly astonishing is that despite their size, Gorgonopsids possessed remarkable flexibility and agility, enabling them to hunt larger prey, such as herbivorous therapsids. What makes them even more unique?
They were the ancestors of modern mammals, and it was in their bodies that the features began to form that would later become characteristic of warm-blooded animals.
These predators used their sharp teeth to tear flesh, but did you know that their extraordinary jaw could open at an angle of up to 75 degrees? This allowed them to capture prey with incredible strength and precision.
Gorgonopsids were not the only predators of their time, but they stood out for their ability to adapt to various environmental conditions, including vast forests and open plains, where they could crawl using their powerful limbs. Now imagine this. While in other parts of the world dinosaurs were just beginning their evolution, Gorgonopsids were already ruling the land. Their remains have been found in places like South Africa and Russia, where fossils of these creatures have been preserved, allowing scientists to study their anatomy and behavior. But that's not the most surprising thing. Gorgonopsids had not only powerful jaws but also a unique thermoregulation system, enabling them to survive in conditions of sharp temperature fluctuations, which were characteristic of their environment.
Did you know that their eyes were located on the top of their head, allowing them to better observe their surroundings?
It's important to note that Gorgonopsids became extinct around 250 million years ago, but their legacy continues to this day. Scientists continue to work on unraveling the mysteries of their life, and did you know what's most fascinating? Some of their features have found their way into the evolution of future mammals, including us. Parasaurs, the first herbivorous reptiles, appeared in a world where life was just beginning to explore new horizons. These creatures possessed unique features that laid the foundation for further evolution.
For instance, the length of parasaurs could reach 3 meters, and their weight could be up to 150 kilograms. They had powerful limbs and a robust body, allowing them to move on land like modern bears.
What is astonishing is that their teeth were adapted for chewing vegetation, making them true herbivorous giants of their time. Imagine them, thick skin covered with hard scales like armor and a small head from which protruded teeth resembling tusks. It is known that parasaurs used their teeth to tear through tough plants that grew in their habitat. But that's not the strangest thing. Their unique physiology allowed them to survive in conditions where other reptiles could not, as they could adapt to various types of vegetation, including poisonous plants that were dangerous to many other animals.
Incidentally, their relationship with modern turtles and crocodiles is surprising. In fact, parasaurs were the ancestors of these animals, and their legacy continues to this day. What is even more astonishing?
Parasaurs could exist in groups of up to 100 individuals, which allowed them to protect themselves from predators. Their social behavior and way of life were quite complex. They lived in herds, which allowed them to jointly search for food and protect themselves from threats. And here's where it gets really fascinating. Their existence spanned millions of years, and they survived numerous catastrophes, including climate changes and changes in ecosystems. But how did they manage this? The secret lies in their ability to adapt to new environments. For example, during their lifetime, they could change their diet depending on the availability of food. So, if the growth of plants was low in one year, they could switch to other food sources, including tree bark. This level of dietary flexibility was crucial for their survival. But that's not all.
Parasaurs had an extremely low metabolism, which allowed them to conserve energy during difficult times. But what is truly astonishing? Some research shows that they could live up to 100 years.
Yes, you heard it right. 100 years for a reptile, that's simply incredible. Their life cycle was filled with unexpected twists, and every detail of their existence opens new perspectives for understanding evolution. The preserved fossil remains show that parasaurs had different species, adapted to various conditions, and each of them had its own characteristics that distinguished it in this complex world. But the most astonishing thing is that some of these species were almost twice as large as their relatives, placing them in a completely unique position in ecosystems. The formation of the supercontinent Pangaea occurred as a result of complex geological processes that altered the appearance of Earth and its climate. Imagine that all the land we know today was united into a single massive body, the size of a modern continent, leading to incredible changes in ecosystems.
Pangaea's area exceeded 100 million square kilometers, and its existence created conditions for global climate changes.
The internal regions of the supercontinent suffered from extreme temperatures. In summer, temperatures could reach 50 degrees Celsius, while in winter they dropped to -30. But here's what's even more astonishing. Since Pangaea was far from the oceans, humidity rapidly decreased, creating conditions for the formation of vast deserts. These deserts were not just sandy beaches, but true oceans of sand stretching for thousands of kilometers.
Complex systems of climate zones also underwent significant changes. In some areas, rainfall was less than 100 millimeters per year, turning vast territories into true wastelands.
However, along the coast where land met the oceans, tropical forests thrived, rich in plant and animal diversity. Imagine giant trees growing to heights of 30 meters and various animal species seeking shelter in their foliage. But that's not all. Such conditions led to the emergence of new species that adapted to these harsh conditions and became dominant in their ecosystems. As Pangaea began to break apart, the climate changed again, and this had long-term consequences for the entire planet. Soon after the breakup, the newly formed oceans became sources of moisture, leading to increased rainfall and the creation of milder climatic conditions. As a result, forests began to grow on the sites of deserts and on vast plains. Grassland ecosystems appeared, becoming homes for numerous new species. Around 30 million years after the breakup of Pangaea, the first mammals appeared on Earth, filling the gaps left by the extinction of dinosaurs. And here's the most fascinating thing. The climate changes caused by the breakup of Pangaea created ideal conditions for the emergence of modern biodiversity, making us ponder how geology influences life on our planet.
Intracontinental deserts that formed at the heart of the supercontinent Pangaea provide a remarkable example of how climate can drastically alter landscapes and life on Earth.
Imagine vast expanses of sand and rock where temperatures soared to 60 degrees Celsius during the day and dropped to zero at night. This extreme contrast made life conditions extremely challenging. However, what is truly astonishing is that organisms thrived in these deserts using unique adaptations. For instance, some plants like rhododendrons developed root systems up to 20 meters long to reach underground water sources that were inaccessible to most other species. But that's not the most unusual thing. Did you know that even ancient reptiles survived in these conditions, traversing long distances in search of food? Their bodies were covered in hard scales that protected them from heat and water loss, and some reached sizes comparable to modern crocodiles. In the deserts of Pangaea, giant insects like dragonflies with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters dominated the air. Imagine these giants hunting small dinosaurs and other reptiles with their sharp teeth and swift movements. But wait, there's more. Scientists discovered that these deserts harbored ecosystems based on rare water sources like oases, where life flourished like in a paradise amidst the sands. These oases attracted not only animals but also plants that couldn't survive in the desert, creating unique microsystems that thrived in this harsh climate. And what's even more shocking, over time, as the climate changed, these deserts began to disappear, and new ecosystems formed in their place. Scientists even found fossilized remains of ancient trees that grew on these lands, reaching heights of up to 30 meters. These trees, preserved as fossils, tell the story of how life adapted and changed in response to climate challenges. Interestingly, these changes preceded the rise of the first flowering plants, which eventually dominated the Earth.
Changes in the geography of Earth served as a catalyst for the evolution of life, and during the Permian period these changes were particularly dramatic.
Imagine a continent called Pangaea that occupied almost the entire surface of the planet and created conditions unlike anything we can imagine today.
It was not just a vast landmass, the landscape was diverse, ranging from giant deserts to vast swamps where extraordinary creatures lived. Notably, during this time sea levels fluctuated significantly, creating vast internal seas that divided the continent into separate sections. For instance, one such sea, the Tethys, became a true artery of life, connecting different ecosystems.
According to research, around 70% of the animal and plant species that existed then inhabited these seas, making them true centers of biodiversity. This led to marine organisms adapting to conditions that seem like science fiction today. Some developed hard shells to protect themselves from predators, while others, like the ammonites, evolved unique forms that allowed them to maneuver easily in water.
But this is not the most peculiar aspect. On land, among the hard vegetation, the ancestors of modern mammals survived, beginning to hunt various reptiles and amphibians. So what happened when the climate began to change?
This is where the real interest begins. As the climate became increasingly arid, vegetation adapted to the new conditions. Instead of lush forests, more resilient plants like conifers appeared.
These changes created new ecological niches. Some animal species began to develop survival skills in the face of water scarcity, while others adapted to new food sources. Now imagine what happens when such changes affect the entire ecosystem. Mammals that began to dominate on land started competing with reptiles for resources. This was a real struggle for survival, and it was during this period that the first true herbivores emerged, capable of surviving on sparse vegetation. But this is not all. With each climate change, entire groups of organisms appeared and disappeared, and the world became a place where survival depended on the ability to adapt to constantly changing and often unpredictable conditions.
Finally, the most remarkable were the species that survived and evolved in conditions that seemed impossible for life. For example, some of the earliest ancestors of lizards were able to tolerate high temperatures that reached up to 150 degrees Celsius in their ecosystems. How do you find that? By the time ecosystems reached their limit, something catastrophic was happening on the planet. The level of carbon dioxide was rising to 6,000 parts per million, which was more than twice the current levels. This led to global warming, where temperatures in some regions reached 35 degrees Celsius, and this was just the beginning. Simultaneously, the oceans were becoming so acidic that it threatened the extinction of marine organisms, including corals, which played a key role in ecosystems.
Don't forget that coral reefs then occupied an area equal to the size of modern-day United States. Many species, including giant ammonites that could reach 2 meters in diameter, were disappearing at an alarming rate. Did you know that at that time, over 90% of all life forms on the planet were at risk, but all of them were threatened?
It appears that on the backdrop of these changes, the level of oxygen in the atmosphere dropped to 21%, putting many terrestrial species at risk. On land, forests that were once teeming with life began to resemble ghostly shadows, and only the most adaptable species could survive in such conditions. Most remarkably, massive volcanic eruptions in the area of modern-day Ural Mountains were spewing enormous volumes of lava and toxic gases, further exacerbating the crisis. Volcanic activity continued for hundreds of thousands of years, and this was not just a background event but a real catastrophe shaping the environment. And now, the most astonishing fact. According to estimates, over 97% of all marine species and more than 75% of terrestrial species disappeared over a few thousand years. This extinction was not only the largest in the history of our planet but also the main catalyst for further evolution, opening new niches for survival. But the question remains, what caused such a sudden change in climate? The answer might surprise you. Siberian traps represent some of the most massive volcanic eruptions in Earth's history, occurring around 250 million years ago and covering an area exceeding 500,000 square kilometers. To grasp the scale of these eruptions, imagine lava flows reaching an average thickness of up to 1,000 meters, spreading over areas comparable in size to the entire modern-day France. As a result of these catastrophic events, more than 30 billion tons of carbon dioxide and over 100 billion tons of sulfur gas were released into the atmosphere, drastically altering its composition and causing massive changes in ecosystems. These emissions led to global warming and oxygen depletion, resulting in the extinction of more than 80% of Earth's species. But did you know that the very lava flows, slowing down, formed gigantic plateaus that later became home to new forms of life? The volcanic activity was accompanied by powerful ash and toxic gas eruptions, making the conditions for life on the planet extremely harsh.
For instance, surface temperatures could rise to 150 degrees Celsius, creating unbearable heat for the remaining organisms. And here's where it gets fascinating. Despite these horrendous conditions, life found ways to adapt. Organisms developed special protective mechanisms against high temperatures and toxic gases. And in this context, one of the most intriguing examples was microbes that could survive even in the most extreme conditions.
These microbes, with their unique properties, became the foundation for the recovery of ecosystems after the catastrophe. It is interesting that the influence of the Siberian traps is still felt today. Many modern plant and animal species carry genetic traces of those ancient adaptations. But did you know that these volcanic eruptions could have been the catalyst for the appearance of the first mammals on the planet? This discovery raises many questions about how catastrophes shape the evolution of life on Earth. How did the animal world change after such events? The answers continue to amaze scientists and researchers, as the mysteries hidden within the Earth's depths still await their revelation. The mechanism of the Permian-Triassic extinction event, which occurred 252 million years ago, is considered the greatest catastrophe in Earth's history, with its consequences being so vast that 97% of all species went extinct. This event was the result of a combination of several catastrophic factors, each of which could have led to a global ecological catastrophe on its own. First of all, one of the most shocking hypotheses is that the very large-scale volcanic eruptions on the territory of modern Siberia, known as the Siberian Traps, released enormous volumes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This led to a sharp increase in temperature, which could reach 30 degrees Celsius in some areas. But that's not all. Volcanoes also released sulfur, which caused acid rain, destroying ecosystems. How could living organisms survive in such conditions? The answer lies in the fact that many species did not have adaptive mechanisms capable of coping with the rapid changes in climate. Do you know what's even more shocking? At that time, the oxygen level in the atmosphere fluctuated greatly. First, it significantly decreased, and then, due to intense volcanic activity, it increased again. This created conditions in which many species that were previously dominant found themselves on the verge of extinction. Do you feel how the atmosphere changes when there is too much carbon dioxide? Imagine that it becomes difficult to breathe, as if you are in a locked room filled with exhaust fumes. But this was not the only factor.
Parallel to this, changes were occurring in the oceans. The increase in water temperature and the decrease in oxygen levels in the marine environment led to mass extinctions of marine inhabitants.
The chemical composition of the water changed so much that coral reefs, which were the basis of the ecosystem, began to massively disintegrate. And here comes the really crazy part. New research shows that during this period there was also a sharp increase in methane in the atmosphere, which exacerbated the greenhouse effect. This methane was released from oceanic sedimentary deposits, creating even more heat, and this was a vicious circle that was difficult to stop.
Can you imagine how the ocean turned into a giant steam bath in which all living things were trying to survive?
As a result of this catastrophic combination of factors, only some groups of organisms survived, such as small mammals and some reptiles, which were able to adapt to the new conditions. But even they faced terrible consequences. Their habitat had changed beyond recognition, and they were forced to adapt to life in conditions that they had never seen before.
And, as if all this was not enough, after this event Earth entered a period when its ecosystems were recovering for millions of years.
Nature, as you understand, had its own plans. It began to fill the voids that had formed after the extinction, and new species emerged. But do you know what is the craziest thing? On Earth, organisms appeared that did not exist before, and it was they who became the basis for future life, including for us. As a result of this catastrophe, the world became different, and evolution took new, unexpected turns that shaped the appearance of the planet as we know it today. Over a brief period of time, lasting only a few tens of thousands of years, a catastrophic event swept across the planet, becoming the most extensive mass extinction in Earth's history. 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate life disappeared without a trace. Imagine oceans teeming with millions of species, from giant ammonites with shells the size of a car to vibrant coral reefs blooming like flowers. All of this was destroyed.
But the most shocking part is that the cause of the catastrophe was not a single factor, but a combination of geological changes, volcanic activity, and rapid climate fluctuations.
For instance, the eruptions of the Siberian Traps, which lasted for millions of years, released carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in quantities comparable to billions of tons, leading to global warming by several degrees. Now, imagine that on top of this warming, the oxygen levels in the oceans dropped sharply, making life unbearable for many marine creatures. This meant that the inhabitants of the seas had to adapt to conditions that no longer suited them. What's even more strange, on land, terrestrial species face similar problems. The disappearance of forests where large dinosaurs and mammals lived created vast deserts where survival became a real challenge. Some species, like crocodiles, managed to survive this crisis due to their adaptability, while others, such as large herbivorous dinosaurs, could not cope with the new conditions. What's even more astonishing? These events created a void into which new species poured, filling ecosystems so different from the old ones that it was a completely new world. In their place came the first mammals and dinosaurs, which began to dominate the planet. And what is truly remarkable, Even millions of years after this extinction, life on Earth began again, but it would never be the same.
Research shows that it was during this period that the ancestors of modern mammals emerged, becoming the dominant inhabitants of the new ecosystem.
These changes set the course of evolution for millions of years to come, leaving us with the question, what would Earth look like if those species had survived? Dead zones in the oceans are a true mystery of nature, where life is virtually absent. These areas, covering more than 30,000 square kilometers, are formed due to excessive nutrient input, leading to algal blooms.
When these algae die, their decomposition consumes oxygen, creating conditions where almost no organisms can survive.
Imagine an ocean where in some places the oxygen level is below 2 milligrams per litre, less than what most marine creatures need. Simultaneously, acidic rains caused by carbon dioxide and sulfur emissions have significantly altered the chemical composition of the atmosphere and oceans, making conditions for life in them even more intolerable. Scientists assert that the pH of the oceans at that time dropped to around 6, meaning the water became more acidic than under normal conditions.
As a result, many marine organisms, including corals and mollusks, began to struggle with forming their calcium-based structures. These changes made ecosystems less resilient and more vulnerable to climate change.
But this is not the most astonishing part. Acidic rains also destroyed forests and soils, exacerbating the situation on land. So, what happened to lizards and other terrestrial creatures in such conditions? The answer is shocking. Many species did not have time to adapt and went extinct, leaving behind a void that was filled by those that managed to survive this ecological crisis. And here's where it gets truly bizarre. Some researchers believe that these dead zones and acidic rains played a key role in one of the most massive mass extinctions in Earth's history. As a result, around 97% of all marine species went extinct. But what's even more shocking? This extinction paved the way for new forms of life that eventually evolved into dinosaurs and mammals, which became dominant in subsequent eras. The composition of the atmosphere changed beyond recognition, primarily due to active volcanic eruptions that occurred during this period. Imagine that as a result of these eruptions, up to 30 billion tons of carbon dioxide were released into the atmosphere each year. This led to a significant increase in carbon dioxide levels, which reached 100% of the current level, creating conditions for global warming. The temperature on Earth rose to 35 degrees Celsius, which was unbearable for many species. But that's not all. The oxygen level was rapidly declining, reaching below 21%, making breathing a challenge for animals and plants.
Picture trying to breathe in conditions where oxygen is less than at 8,000 meters above sea level. Only the most resilient organisms survived.
Small marine creatures like trilobites disappeared in large numbers, and among land animals, there was panic. How did they cope with such changes? The answer lies in their ability to adapt to high temperatures and low oxygen levels, which most could not. But what was even more shocking was that mass migrations of species began, with some leaving their usual habitats in search of more suitable conditions. For example, reptiles began moving to more humid areas where oxygen levels were higher. And here's where it gets really crazy. Some species evolved, developing thermoregulation abilities to cope with the hot climate, allowing them to survive where others could not. This led to the emergence of new ecosystems where life adapted to extreme conditions. And the craziest part? Some of the species that survived became the ancestors of dinosaurs, which later dominated the Earth. Imagine a world where only a few managed to survive one of the most catastrophic mass extinctions in Earth's history. After the Permian-Triassic extinction, which wiped out more than 95% of all species on the planet, the remaining organisms found themselves in conditions where competition was significantly reduced. These survivors, the ancestors of dinosaurs and mammals, were not just simple creatures. They possessed unique adaptations. For instance, some of the earliest mammals, like bonitosaurs, were no larger than mice but had the ability to be active at night, allowing them to avoid large predators. If you think that's remarkable, consider that they survived in conditions where temperatures could reach 50 degrees Celsius in the shade. But that's not the most extraordinary part.
Ancient reptiles like archosaurs evolved in various environments, and some, such as the ancestors of modern crocodiles, became increasingly specialized predators.
They hunted small animals using their sharp teeth and powerful jaws, dominating water bodies. Now imagine that in this same world, there were also unusual small lizards that could climb trees like modern squirrels. These creatures, known as therapsids, had light and flexible bodies, enabling them to maneuver easily among branches. Their sizes ranged from 1 to 3 meters in length, making them large enough to face other predators but small enough to avoid larger threats. And here's where it gets really crazy. Some of these creatures developed unique ways to obtain food, including using their long spines for defense against enemies. Did you know that these spines could reach up to 30 centimeters in length and were used not only for deterrence but also for territorial disputes? In conditions of intense resource competition, these adaptations played a crucial role in survival. Among the survivors were also the ancestors of dinosaurs, who, as it is believed, began to evolve in changing climates. They became larger and more powerful, allowing them to dominate the land.
Some of them reached lengths of up to 30 meters and weighed up to 100 tons. These animals, like the ancestral archosaurs, later evolved into incredibly diverse forms and sizes.
A key aspect of their evolution was their ability to reproduce, which allowed them to quickly fill the ecological niches left vacant by the extinction. But the most fascinating part is that these very survivors became the basis for the appearance of all modern mammals and birds that inhabit Earth today. Have you ever wondered what our beloved pets would look like if this extinction hadn't occurred? After a catastrophic extinction event, Earth's ecosystem underwent radical changes, opening up new ecological niches for various animal groups. Imagine a world where oppressed species are replaced by new inhabitants that begin to dominate the planet. Following this extinction, in the Triassic period, the first dinosaurs appeared, with sizes and shapes that were incredibly diverse. Some of them reached lengths of up to 30 meters, while others were no larger than domestic cats. These creatures began to colonize ecosystems that were free from previous predators and competitors.
But this is not the most unusual aspect. During this period, the first ancestors of mammals also appeared, evolving into small, nocturnal creatures capable of surviving in the new ecosystems. Did you know that it was at this moment that the main groups of mammals were formed? These were not just tiny rodents, but true innovators who would soon give rise to all modern mammals.
And this is where things get really interesting. Among them were species that could reach the size of a modern wolf, but with a completely different body architecture. Evolution was proceeding at breakneck speeds, and each new species found its niche in this changing environment. For example, some of the first dinosaurs, like the Dilophosaurus, had sharp teeth and hunted other animals, while others, like the sauropods, began to consume vegetation that was again beginning to recover after the catastrophe. What's even more astonishing, these giants could weigh up to 100 tons, making them true monsters of their time.
Meanwhile, in the water, equally impressive changes were taking place. Marine reptiles like plesiosaurs began to fill the oceans, mimicking the forms and sizes of dinosaurs on land, but with unique adaptations for underwater life.
This evolutionary creativity led to some of them having necks up to 7 meters long, allowing them to hunt fish at great depths. But that's not all.
Concurrently, changes in Earth's atmosphere were occurring, increasing the oxygen content to 30%, making the existence of such giants possible.
Thus, the Triassic period became a true arena for evolutionary experiments, and this is just the beginning of an amazing journey to the world we know today. The Permian-Triassic extinction event was one of the most catastrophic events in Earth's history. Nearly 90% of all species disappeared over a relatively short period of time.
What is remarkable, however, is that this very extinction paved the way for the subsequent era of reptiles. Following the disappearance of numerous creatures, the ecosystem was left in a state ready for new forms of life to inhabit it.
In the Triassic period that followed, reptiles began to dominate the planet and their diversity became astonishing. For instance, the first dinosaurs, such as Eoraptor, appeared just a few million years after the extinction. These creatures were the size of a cat, but already displayed potential for future giants that would soon occupy the top of the food chain. Now imagine the atmosphere. It contained 30% oxygen and was warm and humid, creating ideal conditions for the growth and development of reptiles. Some of them reached the size of a car, like the first ancestors of dinosaurs, the archosaurs. But that's not all. During this time there were also remarkable forms of life, such as ancient marine reptiles that hunted large fish using their powerful jaws and lengths of up to 7 meters. What is even more astonishing, these reptiles not only survived but also evolved, adapting to the most diverse habitats and developing in directions that we can only speculate about.
For example, some of them began to develop unique hunting methods, including the use of their bright colors to attract mates or for camouflage.
Later, in the late Triassic, the first true dinosaurs appeared on the surface of the Earth, and their sizes became truly colossal.
But that's not all. It was during this period that new ecosystems began to form, where reptiles became the primary predators.
Every corner of the planet began to fill with diverse forms of life that seemed to come alive against the backdrop of the previous devastation. Scientific research shows that it was these changes in ecosystems that led to the creation of numerous new species that dominated the planet for millions of years.
For example, during this time the first mammals began to appear, Although they were small, they laid the foundation for future mammals, including humans.
And here is where it gets truly remarkable. Reptiles not only survived but also adapted to the most varied conditions, from hot deserts to humid forests. From the perspective of modern science, it can be said that it was after such a catastrophe that life on Earth took on completely new forms, marking the beginning of an era when reptiles ruled the planet for millions of years. But what is most astonishing? Some groups of reptiles such as pterosaurs reached wingspans of more than 3 meters, making them the largest flying creatures of their time. These early archosaurs, the ancestors of dinosaurs, were true innovators of their time. Some of them reached lengths of more than 3 meters, and their sizes and structural features allowed them to quickly adapt to changing environmental conditions. Imagine that they could run at speeds up to 30 kilometers per hour, making them some of the fastest creatures on the planet. At that time, Earth had diverse ecosystems, and archosaurs not only survived but began to dominate, hunting smaller animals and taking advantage of their position.
But that's not all. Among them were both carnivorous and herbivorous species, creating a complex web of relationships in their habitat.
For example, crocodile-like archosaurs known as dromaeosaurs had sharp teeth and powerful jaws, enabling them to effectively hunt other reptiles. What's even more astonishing, at that time they already possessed some characteristics that later became the basis for the development of dinosaurs, including hip structure that allowed them to move more efficiently on land. Archosaurs had unique features such as long and powerful limbs that contributed to their speed and maneuverability, enabling them to avoid predators and hunt their prey. Their skin was covered with hard scales, protecting them from attacks by other animals and harsh climatic conditions.
But what is truly remarkable, archosaurs began to actively colonize various biomes, from forests to deserts, developing in conditions that many other species could not withstand.
Their diversity and adaptability are simply astonishing. Some of them even had primitive feathers that later became the basis for the appearance of birds. Now imagine that at that time, Earth already had plants like ginkgo and cycads, reaching heights of up to 30 meters and creating unique ecosystems where archosaurs could find food and shelter. And the most interesting thing, archosaurs began to develop social behavior, hunting in packs and defending their territories from other predators. These changes in behavior and evolution became foundational for the appearance of dinosaurs, which would soon change the face of the planet forever.
It's interesting that some archosaurs continued to exist even after the extinction of dinosaurs, adapting to new conditions and leaving their mark on the history of our planet.
After the Permian-Triassic extinction event, when ecosystems were emptied, Earth began to slowly recover. It took several million years for new species to appear and fill the void left by the vanished inhabitants. Imagine a world dominated by giant plants such as conifers up to 30 meters tall, creating dense forests that served as shelter for numerous animals.
Initially, small reptiles and amphibians were the first settlers, utilizing the remnants of ancient ecosystems to survive and adapt to the new conditions. For example, ancient lizards known as archosaurs began hunting small invertebrates, and their sizes increased over time, reaching more than a meter in length. During this time in the Triassic period, the world was filled with new species. Among them were primitive dinosaurs like Dilophosaurus, which could run on its hind legs and reach lengths of up to 6 meters.
But that's not the most astonishing part. Some species developed unique adaptations to survive in the growing competition for resources. And here's what's even more shocking. In this period, the first true mammals appeared, such as Triassic synapsids, which were the size of a modern rat but had unique features that allowed them to survive in conditions where other creatures could not. They had highly developed senses and could hunt insects and small vertebrates, giving them an advantage in this new world. By the end of this period, ecosystems began to stabilize, and new plant species emerged, ferns and seed-bearing plants that provided oxygen and food for many creatures. This was a period of true biological flourishing, when life again filled Earth, creating complex food chains and ecosystems. And here's where it gets really crazy. In this period, the first ancestors of modern lizards and snakes appeared, beginning to develop their hunting and survival skills.
These creatures, using their agility and speed, were able to occupy new niches in the ecosystem. You would never believe that it was at this moment that the foundations for the diversity of life we observe today were laid.
And here's what's even more amazing. Some dinosaur species began to develop feathers, which were initially used not for flight, but for thermoregulation and attracting mates, which later became a key factor in their evolution. Imagine a world where the entire planet is covered in gigantic plants, reaching heights of 30 meters and filling the air with oxygen to 35%. This created ideal conditions for life to reach incredible sizes. In such conditions, insects with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters, twice the size of modern butterflies, emerged. These colossal creatures crawled the earth, hunted small creatures, and served as food for larger predators.
But this is not the most astonishing part. While some species survived, others went extinct, making way for new forms of life. In these conditions, complex ecosystems formed, where each plant and animal played its role. What is even more shocking?
These early ecosystems laid the foundation for the first dinosaurs.
When the Triassic period began, life on Earth was ready for new experiments. Plants that had developed various survival strategies provided the necessary food for herbivorous dinosaurs.
They, in turn, became a source of food for predators that began to dominate the planet. But in this diversity, there was one enormous problem: the Permian-Triassic mass extinction. This event, which wiped out 95% of all species, was a true catastrophe. But paradoxically, it opened new horizons for evolution.
With the disappearance of many competitors, the remaining species had the chance to occupy new ecological niches.
And here begins the truly incredible. It was after this extinction that dinosaurs were able to evolve into giant reptiles that later dominated the Earth for millions of years.
Without this extraordinary period, when life on the planet experimented with sizes and forms, none of the dinosaurs we know today could have existed. Ultimately, this experiment with life became the basis for the existence of enormous creatures that later filled our planet, and their diversity is astounding. From Triceratops with 3 horns to enormous Tyrannosaurus rex, which became the symbol of the dinosaur era.